Hey everybody and welcome back to Inside Gaming. Today we are reviewing Resident Evil 3, or more appropriately, Resident Evil 3 Remake. I'm Caden and with me is Amir.
Hello.
And we're going to be taking a look into what Resident Evil 3 Remake has to offer. We actually have a pseudo-retrospective look into where Resident Evil 3 as a game, the original one, stands in the whole legacy of everything. That's coming out tomorrow. But for now, let's actually dive into what Resident Evil 3 Remake actually is. So first and foremost, Amir, how much time did you actually put into the game?
Yeah, so I spent a little over 5 hours just because I was trying to soak in as much as I could before progressing to the next area, you know, like you do in a Resident Evil game. And also I died to the hunters a lot, but I did manage to beat the game.
I put in about 10 hours total. That's between the actual story mode and also the Resistance multiplayer mode, and we'll get into that in a little bit. But overall for the Resident Evil 3 Remake main story, my clear time was around 5 hours, with total campaign playtime being closer to like 7-ish, with some extra deaths in there. And yeah, those hunters are extra mean. Those gammas, though, they are horrifying.
Yeah, there was one part where I thought I had killed one, and I completely failed to like read the animation to make sure they were dead, and I turned around and he swallowed me up, and it was the most horrifying moment in that game.
Were you happy with the amount of playtime that you got out of this for the story? I mean, we both cleared it at about 5 hours. My clear time was, I think, 4 hours, 58 minutes, and yours was 5 hours and 7 minutes, so we're pretty close.
Yeah. I mean, as far as being happy with the total playtime, I mean, obviously I would have liked more. But I mean, I think it's one of those things where I would have been happy if there was a little bit more in the realm of replayability, which there is. I mean, you know, obviously of like different difficulties and stuff like that. But I mean, as far as being happy with the initial playtime, not 100%, just because when Resident Evil 2 Remake came out, you know, the natural order of things is your first playthrough is the longest, and as you play more of it, it gets shorter and shorter. But to have your first playthrough be extremely short, it's a little disappointing, but overall, I'm okay with it.
Yeah, I kind of feel the exact same way about it. It's great, and you feel like you're going through this really epic journey, and you're being chased the entire time. And again, we'll get into that. But overall, I mean, 5 hours for Resident Evil 3, it's pretty close to what the original was. So, you know, it's par for the course, but man, I really just wanted more from this. It feels like they could have definitely like really spread this game apart and made it a little bit more, you know, in depth than they originally planned. Make it more than just a remake and actually add in some additional segments.
You know, some areas were a little more fleshed out, which is great in terms of adding content, but it would have been better if they didn't cut so much out. But yeah, I agree. I feel like they definitely should have and could have added a lot more.
Okay, so now that we've gotten that little caveat out of the way, let's talk about story. This takes place just before Resident Evil 2, and it runs through the eventual conclusion of that game. So this is kind of, Resident Evil 3 is like a side story that shows what Jill Valentine is doing during this whole Raccoon City outbreak that's going on. The game sees Jill teaming up with Carlos, a UBCS operative, in a desperate attempt to save Raccoon City and its people, while Jill is constantly being chased and terrorized by Nemesis. And Nemesis is this hulking monster in this game. Really scary, like really scary. I was pins and needles anytime in the early hours of the game when I just had a pistol running away from Nemesis. I felt completely underprepared. What about you?
Yeah, no, I was, when he first popped, I mean, I definitely like how he was introduced. And yeah, just that whole opening segment, it was definitely very, you felt so helpless. You're just like, where do I go? How do I get around him? I mean, naturally, when you learn how to kind of skirt him a little bit, then it gets a little bit easier. But yeah, in the opening hours, it was just like, wow, this guy wants to kill me.
What did you think about the relationship between Carlos and Jill in the remake compared to how it was in the original?
I like it. It was less campy. I mean, it was still pretty campy, but it was less campy. You know, because in the original, obviously, Carlos has his famous line. I know you want to ask me out. All the ladies love my accent or whatever the hell. He's less of that and a little bit more of a boots on the ground, you know, military type. But I really do enjoy their chemistry. I think it's, you know, makes sense for this modernization of a classic. I like just how they interact with each other. All of it's very believable. The animations, like just when they're in conversation, is just all very solid, and it's also very like immersive. Just like watching their conversations take place, I think it was great.
Yeah, we're going to try not to spoil too much of this game, but a lot of this game revolves around the relationship between Jill and Nemesis and Jill and Carlos. And Jill just being this, really accepting and understanding person, knowing that Carlos works for Umbrella, and also understanding that this Nemesis thing is constantly chasing and knows that it's only after her, not anybody else. So a lot of the, the dynamics and the relationships that are, explored in this game really stem from those two things. It's Jill being able to trust anybody else while also trying to keep everybody else safe from this thing that is chasing her. So it's kind of a very weird dynamic compared to a lot of the other stuff you see in Resident Evil games, or at least the earlier ones. This one's a lot more, there's people. You see people. You interact with them. There's like characterizations, whereas in the first Resident Evil game, and to a lesser degree the second, there's not a lot of people hanging around just doing stuff.
Because they're all dead.
I mean, that's fair. That is very fair. They are definitely all dead. But is there anything that they changed that you did really like or you didn't really like?
Yeah, so there's a few things. I mean, I don't obviously want to spoil too much, but there is obviously a lot of changes in this game. A lot of changes. Most of this game is changed. If you're a fan of the original and you want to go into this with, your rose-colored nostalgia glasses, and you want to take a little tour through your childhood and see everything, that probably won't happen. I mean, it'll happen to an extent, but it won't be as much as it was for the Resident Evil 2 remake, where a lot of it was faithful to the original. There are a few locales that you will recognize, like the chalk on the ground in one of the areas. That's from the original. I'm not spoiling that. That was in the trailer. There are a few little nuances that you will definitely pick up on, but a good majority of it is changed. Like the whole Dario segment in the warehouse. That I was a little disappointed by.
Yeah, it definitely feels like I explored less of Raccoon City in this game than I did in the original Resident Evil 3 Nemesis game, which feels weird. I don't know about you, but I felt like I was very funneled through. And yes, to a degree, Nemesis chasing you is that like funneling purpose. It's like you're being chased by this thing, move forward. You're always being chased, even if you don't think you are. So there is that motivation, but that was also there in the original, and you still had those downtime moments to do a lot of puzzles and stuff like that. It definitely feels smaller than the original as far as like scope and locales. I don't know about you.
Yeah, it feels smaller, but more realized. I know that in the beginning, there's sort of like a hub world. I use that term lightly, but there's a little area that you can explore that has different doors and different buildings you can go in, but you do need certain items to get into them. And it's not a huge fetch quest. It's literally you find 2 things and then you can get in all of them. But yeah, it definitely feels a lot more streamlined, but not in a good way. I think they definitely could have implemented a lot more segments from the original that would have fleshed it out a bit more. But yeah, it definitely does feel a little bit smaller, but I don't entirely mind that. I think that beginning segment was gorgeous. Everything that we saw was really cool. It just really sucks that it was so short-lived and you couldn't really spend a whole lot of time there.
So we're going to get into gameplay in just a moment, but I do think it's worth mentioning that in the Resident Evil 3 remake, it does open up with a live-action cutscene that has actors portraying news anchors and CDC members that are warning people of a widespread pandemic, that they're issuing a quarantine and shelter-in-place countermeasures, and there's an entire loss of the southern United States. So it's a little on the nose right now. Amir, you and I very briefly talked about this as well, and it was just, I mean, we messaged each other right after we had both seen that intro, and it's just like, wow, right now, this is kind of, woof.
Yeah, I even said it doesn't feel like I'm playing a video game. It feels like I'm just watching CNN.
Yeah, for sure. But let's actually get into the gameplay. Resident Evil 2 Remake came out last year, and Resident Evil 3 Remake it's more of the same. It really is. They fine-tuned a little bit of things in there, but more or less, if you liked playing that game as far as gameplay, you're going to like this one. The gunplay feels snappy, it's responsive, each weapon carries its own unique weight, and recoil, and all that lovely stuff. they all feel really good to use. I really like, you know, it's like, and you're gonna like end up having your own favorites. You know, mine was the shotgun. I love shotguns in video games in general, but this shotgun just felt like really meaty and good to use. It felt really, you know, powerful, but there's not a ton of ammo in the game, so you have to be mindful about how you use it. So I kind of tried to balance out my shotgun usage throughout the entire game. Dodging and quick turning make the skirting around zombies a breeze, and it's great, and I love the quick turn mechanic, and that was, you know, it was implemented in the original Nemesis. But once you're in like larger groups and you're doing those dodges and quick turns, and when those bigger enemies come out, you're gonna end up dodging more than likely into the arms of another enemy while you're trying to run away from another. It happened a lot late game for me when they introduced the pale head enemies, and it was a little frustrating, just a smidge. But, you know, there's weapon upgrades that are scattered throughout the game. There's ammo and herb mixing, because they're just as important as ever. In fact, more so now than ever before. And the ammo and health placement, as I mentioned before, it just feels right. There's never too much, and there's never, you know, not enough. You feel like there's just enough health and ammo to get you through whatever challenge is placed in front of you. Or at least that's how I felt about it. Amir, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, like you said, it feels extremely good to play. But yeah, it is more or less the same than what we got last year with Resident Evil 2 Remake. The perfect dodge is an excellent addition, and executing the perfect one adds to that really intense gameplay. Nemesis poses a threat in the beginning, but once that dodge mechanic is perfected, then he becomes a little too easy to dodge. Yeah, like I said, the gunplay is satisfying as hell, and I'm happy, extremely happy that they did away with the breakable knife. I think that was it's definitely, I touch on this later, but getting rid of the breakable knife is a good thing, but also a bad thing, because you notice a small little thing about the zombies, which we'll get into later.
So speaking of subtle touches, let's get into this next area, which is presentation and graphics. Amir, was this game pretty? Was it just okay?
It was gorgeous. There was a lot of it where I just spent just looking at textures. I mean, as much time as I could without, you know, getting absolutely destroyed by something. But yeah, no, the original Resident Evil 3 oozed atmosphere. Like, that was my favorite part of the original Resident Evil 3. Just all the colors in the city, and that's why, I mean, Resident Evil 3 was amazing, and I'm floored with how they captured that same essence in terms of aesthetic. So yeah, that's the good. Now there is some bad. Zombie dismemberment was significantly downgraded. Limbs now explode instead of slip off when shot, and I understand why they had to do this, but it is a noticeable downgrade. The inclusion of exploding barrels and generators make blasting hordes so satisfying. And I do have another downside, and that is the main baddie, the man, Nemesis himself. He's hardly in the game. When he does show up, it's great, but I really wanted more of him. I felt like he was represented as more of an occasional nuisance than a real threat, and unfortunately he was severely underutilized in the game. I definitely, outside of those beginning moments, I wanted more of him, and that can be a good thing because, you know, they say if games make you want more, that is usually a good thing. But I don't know if that can be said here.
Yeah, I definitely, I feel you there. In those first, like, honestly, in that first, like, hour and a half, 2 hours, which is pretty much when you're going to be dealing with Nemesis a lot, it feels imposing, and you always kind of feel like you're looking over your shoulder. But I never felt, you know, it's like once I actually got a rhythm of things, I never felt scared of Nemesis, and that kind of like detracts from things for me. But when he's there and he is that boss and you're having those moments, this is like, oh, now it's on. Now it's here. And, you know, it's like, do I have everything with me? Am I going to die this time? Is it going to send me back? Then what do I need to do to prepare for this? There's a lot of humming and hawing over, do I take this next step forward? Because Nemesis might be there and I don't know if I'm fully prepared for it, because sometimes you need to leave inventory slots open for picking up items or puzzle things or any numerous amount of other things that are in there. But yeah, Nemesis was imposing, a very big threat, and I wanted more of normal Nemesis, and then later on things change and you get less and less of Nemesis. And again, that's a little bit into the spoiler territory, so we're not going to go too far into that, but yeah, definitely feeling you right there. Jill and Carlos look great though. Like, they look fantastic. Jill, Carlos, and like the normal big standing Nemesis, I love how they look.
They look better than they ever have.
I agree. I completely agree. Carlos looks fantastic, and I like Jill's new style. I like her new haircut. I dig it.
Yeah. Same. She looks gorgeous. I love the new redesigns.
I do have an issue, and forgive me if I'm not remembering this right, but I think it was in the Resident Evil 2 remake. But when there are zombies that are a significant distance away, they're just far enough away, they have this like really choppy slideshow animation that happens until they get closer, and it kind of ruins it for me just a smidge. When the zombies that are up close have these like really fluid motion, but when it's like, it's only like 10 feet away in the game, but this zombie's just kind of chopping back and forth. That's a little, it does take me out of it and make me, think it's like, well, yeah, definitely a game. This is definitely a game.
I did actually experience that, and I know exactly what you're talking about, because in the Resident Evil 2 remake, if you go up to the top floor or the top level of the police station, you look down, and the zombies that are there, that's when they'll start doing that weird choppy animation. But yeah, in this one, I feel like they did it a lot closer. Like there is one of the enemies that when I faced one of the drain demos, they were not that far away, and he was still stuttering around, and I was like, oh, that's weird. I know typically there's like a lot more of a draw that they need for that to happen. But yeah, that did kind of take me out.
Okay, so it seems like we got a little bit of good, a little bit of bad going on here. Let's talk about music though, because the music I felt was really good. It was really tense, and it drove that point of, this is an escape game. This isn't just a survival horror. You are running away. I mean, we've been talking about it this entire review. This game is about getting the hell out of Raccoon City, and I feel like the music really just kind of emphasizes that. And to the point of earlier, each gun has its own like really big reverberating sound, and all the sound design just feels like it's very atmospheric. It really does like put you, more so than anything else, I feel like the music and the sound effects really put you into the mindset of, this is Resident Evil. This is horror.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, Resident Evil obviously is famous for the music. I own all the soundtracks on vinyl. I'm huge.
Even the director's cut with that fantastic song?
No, because they didn't release that one on the basement. They didn't release that one on vinyl, unfortunately, or else I would buy it. But yeah, no, they didn't include the original soundtrack swap in this one, unfortunately. But that makes sense, because in Resident Evil 2 Remake, I always use the original soundtrack swap. In this one, they actually chose to just remix the old school theme songs, which is great. But I feel like they could have done a little bit more as far as music goes. But the ambiance and just like the overall sound design of how all the enemies sound is just, it's so good.
Yeah, the audio cues for like all the zombies, the hunters, the gammas, Nemesis, every single enemy has its own kind of unique tell that it's coming, or it's here, or it's like you see it show up. There's all these different groans and cues to keep you aware of your surroundings. This game, I really feel like you could play this with headphones and have that surround sound audio going on and just be completely immersed.
Yeah, like with the pitter-patters of the drain demos and the gargles of the hunter gammas is just, that would make the gameplay extremely heightened. So I highly recommend playing with headphones.
Could not agree more. So now it's time to talk about that other thing that came with Resident Evil 3 before we get into anything else. The other thing. Let's talk about Resistance, which is the standalone sort of multiplayer mode. How much time did you spend in Resistance?
So I played 3 rounds as a survivor, and it was pretty good. I had a good time with it. I mean, there were some connection issues on the Mastermind's end that made the game just a bit too easy. I mean, you were there. One round we literally just walked to the end with only facing really one zombie, and that can really break the flow of gameplay.
Yeah, I spent around 2 hours in Resistance, which, it doesn't sound like a lot, but matches are really short. They can go anywhere from between 10 minutes and 15 minutes, give or take, unless you, get completely demolished. Then it'll be like 2 or 3 minutes, and then you'll just restart all over again. But this is an asymmetric multiplayer game, and it's exactly what you think it is. It's just like, if you played Last Year the Nightmare, Dead by Daylight, Friday the 13th, this is that game, but with a Resident Evil coat of paint. And it does okay. It does a decent enough job. I wanted to like it more than I did. I feel like asymmetrical games are finally kind of coming into their own after Evolve kind of like whiffed real hard. We're kind of getting into a point where people are starting to appreciate what they can do, but I wish this game would have done more for that, especially because of what it ended up replacing.
To its credit, I do like the aspect of relying on teammates for help. I mean, that's what made the Outbreak series so great, but honestly, the whole time while I was playing it, I just couldn't help but ask myself, why didn't they just give us Outbreak instead? I mean, I understand why they made this, but I feel like, I don't know, the 4v1, the whole asymmetric thing, I feel like it's just too little too late. But I mean, it is fun for what it is, but I would have much rather preferred Outbreak, or at least Mercenaries, Mad Jackal. Give us that.
Yeah, I mean, when this works, it's really fun and it's really satisfying, and when you actually accomplish it and you get to the end and you get to the exit, it feels good. But, I mean, I do have some gripes with how the maps are laid out. I mean, in Resident Evil, there's usually tight corridors and small places, but you have 4 survivors rolling around, and now, you know, this mastermind's dropping a bunch of zombies. Those small corridors get real small, and you can almost not tell what's actually going on, and it just becomes this visual, clumsy mess of things, which is a little disappointing. But to its credit, it is still kind of fun when it works. As you play, though, you know, when you actually get there, you get those points to get RP, and these points are used to unlock passive skills or cosmetic items. Earning them isn't really that hard. I mean, even if you lose, you still earn some, which is great, and you level up, and that's great, and all that stuff. But you can boost your RP that you earn with RP boosters, and you can earn those RP boosters in the game by playing it more. Or, and here it comes, you can just buy them from the store, so they're sort of microtransaction-y. So, I mean, yes, you can still just play the game and unlock things naturally, but, you know, you can use those boosters and just speed on through, and, I mean, it felt unnecessary. I mean, I don't really think anybody's going to go into this and be just like, well, I have to buy the RP boosters so I can get a costume for, you know, all these characters. But, I mean, it's okay. I mean, it's fine. I do agree with you, though. Resistance is just okay. It's an okay mode. I wish there was Mercenaries. I would have preferred Mercenaries because it fits with what we got for the original Resident Evil 3. They could have completely redone Mercenaries mode, which didn't it start in this one? Isn't this where Mercenaries began?
Yeah, it started with Resident Evil 3. And yeah, I mean, with the new mechanics they introduced, I feel like it would have been perfect to bring back Mercenaries.
So while we're harping on a bunch of things and we're airing grievances, let's talk about technical issues and gripes a little bit. I mentioned this before, the further you are from zombies, the more they kind of move like a slideshow, and it kind of looks goofy. I had Jill clip into the stairs at least once in the game for me. Not really a big deal, but kind of just figured I'd mention it. Brought up Mercenaries mode, but they're also missing live selection mode, which would have been really cool and would have added that, you know, replayability factor to it, where you get to choose between a slight difference in branch. I mean, it's not, you know, Leon A, Claire B, or Claire A, Leon B, but having those choices in there for the original Resident Evil 3 Nemesis made it feel like replaying it was worth it, even if the changes were tiny and microscopic. Do you have any issues, any technical issues or gripes or problems that you had with the game overall?
Yeah, so for starters, my knife went through a box a few times. It wouldn't register actually breaking the box. And then another thing too is when there's a zombie on the floor, and not even one that's supposed to get up, but just, you know, a nice little set piece, right? Just a dead zombie on the floor, and you want to make sure it's dead before you proceed to the next area. In Resident Evil 2 Remake, you would knife it, you would cut its legs off, you would just completely dismember him, so in the off chance he does get up, he can't get you. That doesn't happen here. Knifing it doesn't give you any sort of tactile response like it did in its predecessor, so it feels just like you're hitting the floor. There's no blood splatter, but instead you get sparks from your knife hitting the tile, which is a little, yeah, it kind of takes you out of it a little bit. It is extremely immersion breaking, and I mean, this means that the zombies are a lot more scripted in terms of grab the key item, the zombie will wake up, and you no longer have the option of disabling an enemy before proceeding. And also, I walked through Nemesis once, so that was pretty cool.
Any final thoughts you have on the game, Amir?
I'll start off by saying Resident Evil 3 Remake is a thrill ride all throughout. I mean, there was really never a dull moment during my first playthrough. However, while playing, I did have an overwhelming sense of something is missing. And that's because, like I said, you know, a lot was missing. Some of the most memorable moments and locales from the original are just completely gone. It was a little disheartening, but, you know, it does come with the territory of modernizing a classic. But I do think it does stand nicely as a companion piece to Resident Evil 2 Remake, but I think the game could do well with some DLC. My biggest problem with this game is just the way Nemesis was marketed as this overwhelming threat, but he wasn't really a threat at all. He was just an occasional hulking cutscene that you could shoot at, and that was a little disappointing to me. However, the boss battles in the game are some of the best in Resident Evil history. I have seen the argument that it's not worth the $60 price tag, and I strongly disagree. I think if you're a hardcore fan of the franchise, you'll definitely get your money's worth. Yeah, I mean, all in all, it's an excellent game, but way more of a reimagining than a remake, which is okay.
For me, Resident Evil 3 Nemesis and Code Veronica X were my favorites. They were my favorite Resident Evil games of all time. And
same.
I feel like the Resident Evil 3 remake does the original just enough justice while also fixing some plot holes and giving a better look to Carlos and Jill and their relationship. And, you know, Nemesis's redesign is really cool, but ultimately it just kind of feels not as faithful to the original as I really would have liked. It drops it on, you know, puzzles. It entirely cuts the live selection mode and mercenaries mode, which definitely feels off to me as a long-standing fan of the series. Resistance is fun, it's great, but it's not really a good replacement for the live selection or mercenaries mode as far as replayability for me personally. Fans of the franchise, like you said, I think who really especially like Resident Evil 2 Remake will probably have no problems falling in love with this game, really liking it. But if you're expecting something a little bit meatier or girthier with, you know, the entire campaign, you know, you're not going to get as much as you think you are in that vein.
Yeah, and I would also like to point out, just as a quick sidebar, I know that there were a lot of so-called confirmations about certain enemies making a return. None of them were true. Just want to throw that out there.
So thank you, Capcom, for providing codes for us. We greatly appreciate it. These are our thoughts on the Resident Evil 3 remake. What are your thoughts on them? We'd love to hear what you have to think about this game, especially those of you who have been around for a while and may have played the original or just got into the series very recently. We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments down below. And again, thanks for watching Inside Gaming. We'll see you next time.
See ya.
Last year, the world got the long-awaited RE2 remake, and that's more than exceeded fans' expectations, myself included. It's received a banger of a Metacritic score of 91, but can Capcom catch lightning in a bottle? Twice?
Well, it's no secret that Capcom had some growing pains with the Resident Evil series not very long ago. After the original trilogy and spin-offs, they started to take some